Meet Jamie Daniel, a gangster in the shadows and master of deception. From a small Glasgow scrapyard, he runs a massive heroin empire.
Heroin had just come into Glasgow in a big way. There was loads of people getting into it and they were all using needles, and it was just an epidemic.
The Daniels. They're the most powerful narcos in what is a violent city.
I've saw people getting shot in the street. I've saw people getting scalped. I saw somebody getting their throat cut in the street. To me, it's just everyday things.
Through their infamous enforcer, Kevin Gerbil Carroll, they employ extreme violence.
He was a complete sociopath. He had no empathy for anybody. His driving factor was money.
He frequently abducts and tortures his victims. Jamie Daniel, one of 10 siblings, and a man with big ambitions.
You had to be cautious dealing with him. He had the reputation of being one step or two steps ahead of the police all the time and pretty much untouchable.
In Glasgow's underworld, Jamie Daniel faces a dangerous enemy. Eddie Lyons, boss of an upcoming rival family who has the Daniels in his sights.
There's a huge amount of bad blood. There's been extreme violence and loss of life on each side.
This is the incredible story of two families locked in a murderous and bloody feud, the likes of which Britain has never seen before. Who will win? And who will die? Family Don Jamie Daniel is born into the abject poverty of post-war Glasgow.
Economic deprivation had begun to bite. One of the main facts was a decline in the shipbuilding. At one time, there was a shipyard in almost every corner, in the same way there was a pub in almost every corner, but gradually even the big giants collapsed.
Young Jamie is 10 when his dad dies, leaving his mother to raise the family in Postle Park, one of Glasgow's most violent slums. Teenage Jamie Daniel quickly graduates to a life of crime, earning a living breaking into warehouses and stealing scrap metal. And he quickly learns that extreme violence is the best method to carve a niche in the underworld.
It was infamous as an area where razor slashing was a crime. Sometimes a razor slasher would speak to his victim and say, if your ma is not doing anything tonight, let her stitch this up, at which point you then slashed with a razor.
I've been brought up in the violent world.
Ian MacDonald is an ex-criminal who battled on the same streets of Glasgow as Jamie Daniel.
When I first started out in crime, I was going about Glasgow and I was using a lot of knives and Stanley blades. I'd be slashing people and stabbing people and that, because it's that natural to me.
One event plunges Jamie deep into the criminal underworld. Jamie's elder brother Billy and his mates are stealing copper cable from a derelict building. When they're challenged by an off-duty policeman, The policeman is left for dead.
Billy was caught and imprisoned for that. Now, I think that incident really shaped Jamie Daniels' visceral hatred of the police, which was lifelong.
As the 70s roll into the 80s, the Daniel family gain a reputation for ruthlessness.
They realised to progress in the criminal world they were in, they would have to resort to even greater violence than their competitors were using.
The name Jamie Daniel started appearing in connection with various police intelligence reports. You get tipsters to tell you things about this guy, Jamie Daniel, and he'll buy and sell anything. He maybe can make people disappear.
A now notorious gangster, Jamie Daniel soon realises there's a world of money to be made outside the scrap metal business.
Oh, where is the wee shop where I used to buy a quarter of tatties and a fourpenny pie?
Just a few miles from where Prince Charles and Princess Diana are opening Glasgow's Garden Festival, heroin is king.
How easy is it for somebody to become a heroin addict on an estate like this?
It's just like going to the shops for a pint of milk.
It's just like going for a cream bun. Anybody can get it.
It was almost an epidemic. There were whole generations of families who were heroin addicts. The more people that get hooked onto it, it was just like a never-ending cycle.
31-year-old Jamie Daniel is quick to identify new lucrative opportunities.
There was a new regime, and the new regime was based on drug dealing.
Jamie Daniel, through his contacts in the stolen car parts business, made some links down south and decided that he would follow suit of the other people who had made a lot of money very quickly selling drugs.
Jamie has no interest in joining the throngs of small-time street pushers. He wants to make serious money, fast.
He had an association with a Scottish Pakistani family in Glasgow who had connections in Pakistan, bringing in heroin. And of course, if you're able to bring in high purity, high volume amounts of drugs, that's where the real money is.
Now with his hands on major consignments of heroin, Jamie directs his efforts to forging links with criminal gangs around Britain.
The drug scene in Glasgow today is a million miles away from the hippie dabblings of the 60s. Now it's big business. Profits of up to 300% on heroin, the fastest growing sector of the drugs underworld, are attracting large-scale organized crime rings.
The government is starting a war on drugs.
We're after you. The pursuit will be relentless. The penalty will be confiscation of everything you've ever got from drug smuggling. So stop it.
On the streets, the Glasgow police are faced with the harsh reality.
The police were blindsided by the rapid growth of the heroin problem, and before anything could be done about it properly, it was probably out of hand. There was a lot of violence. The murder rate was through the roof. It wasn't uncommon for Strathclyde police to be dealing with 90 murders a year.
From their scrapyards in North Glasgow, Jamie and the Daniel family start to build their heroin empire.
In the 1980s, just as heroin was becoming a huge problem in places like Possil, he was capitalising on that. And the money to be had was obscene and extraordinary.
Soon, Jamie is making millions. A Don emerging from the smack trade, working hard to outfox the police.
He was very surveillance aware. Some other organised criminals like to make themselves be known and ingratiate themselves with politicians, whereas he kept a very low profile.
It wasn't like the old gangsters of the 60s and 70s where everyone knew their face. People all over Scotland could point at a picture and say, that's so-and-so. He's a famous Glasgow gangster. It wasn't like that. These people were largely anonymous. These guys flew under the radar for a long, 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 long time.
In dirty overalls, and often at the wheel of a battered van, Jamie Daniel knows remaining anonymous is key to the family's survival. But his life in the shadows is about to end. There's a drug epidemic raging in Glasgow. And Jamie Daniel is at its heart. But his status as the most feared crime lord in Scotland is under threat. There's a party at a Daniel safe house. Two gatecrashers stumble upon a £20,000 stash of cocaine. And nobody notices when they slip out. The next morning, the stash is missing.
The Daniel family learned of this and were extremely angry and acted and reacted the way that you'd expect them to, with extreme violence.
Who takes the blame? Eddie Lyons Sr. and his small-time criminal family.
Eddie, just a kind of Jack the Lad, gallus, as we say in Glasgow, a cheeky, overconfident attitude. Just a typical Glasgow guy involved in the fringes of criminality.
Eddie Lyons has been handed control of a community centre in nearby Milton.
While the Daniels over the years had been absolutely hostile to the police, the Lyons were a lot more cunning and manipulative from the early days in the community centre.
Hey, you ready? Local people are definitely the answer. I mean, outsiders, people who work 9 to 5, I mean, they can dictate what they would like to see, but at the same time, they don't live within the area.
Eddie Lyons puts on a good front. Cops suspect he is using the community centre as a base for petty crime.
Eddie Lyons Sr. appeared to be dealing in, not drugs, but counterfeit VHS videos of films. He was not seen as a threat. All of a sudden, we became aware that they were starting to progress up the ladder.
The Daniels were well established and extremely dangerous, whereas the Lyons were considered to be slightly upstarts. They were young boys who didn't know any better. These two were nowhere near rivals.
The disappearance of the Daniels' stash of cocaine is about to set them on a bloody collision course. Jamie Daniel wants revenge. And he's got the perfect man for the job. His enforcer, Kevin Carroll, also known as Gerbil.
Kevin Carroll was a sociopath. He had no empathy for anybody. He could hurt somebody at the flick of a switch. You could be in a room, everyone's sitting, chatting away, ha ha, laughy, laughy, laughy. 2 minutes later, someone's getting dragged out in their car and slashed.
Gerbil's signature tactic is to abduct and terrorize rival drug dealers.
Kevin Carroll was infamous for what became known as alien abductions.
Come on now, wake yourself up, boy.
Which was where drug dealers lying in their beds at night sleeping suddenly woke up surrounded by masked men, armed, then abducted from their own home. The chap I met is dragged into a chair. He's got a pillowcase over his head. And they slowly broke a couple of bones in his hand, including one of his fingers. He said, and then I really knew I was in trouble. He said, they pulled out a grinder.
There you go.
They were going to cut his nipples off. He could feel it starting to catch his skin. But he said, at that point, I said, look, here's the code for my home safe. Here's a house where I stash my gear. Here's a flat where I've got a car key sitting for a stolen Audi that's cloned. Take the lot, just don't hurt me. Then he got taken out, he got knocked unconscious. He said the last thing was, before they dumped him out the car, gave him a boot. Someone peed on him, someone urinated on this guy to wake him up. Face right at him. You know who I am, bang bang. It was Kevin Carroll staring right into his face.
The reason they get the nickname alien abduction is because very often the victims would be dumped in the street after they had been tortured, threatened or beaten, and when they were picked up by the police or when anyone asked them what had happened, they said they had no memory of it.
Gerbil is now dispatched by Jamie Daniel to avenge the stolen stash of cocaine. Within hours, the Lyons family HQ is smashed up and set on fire. Jamie thinks he's put the Lyons in their place. But there's a dangerous young cub in the pride. 2003.
What is 100% certain is that Saddam must be disarmed of the weapons of mass destruction.
As Britain goes to war in Iraq, trouble is brewing on the streets of Glasgow. "24-year-old Stephen Lyons has taken over as family boss from his father, Eddie.
He's an intelligent individual. He's built up worldwide contacts. I have respect for the way he went about his business, in that he was difficult to catch. He was very organised.
Though Stephen Lyons has never been convicted for drug offences, police suspect he wants to expand the Lyons family business, now making him a rival to the Daniels' £16 million a year empire.
The intelligence started to increase that was coming in, which suggested that the Daniel team had become jealous of the money that was being made by the Lyons.
Jamie Daniel feels his place as top gangster is being challenged. The Lyons are about to learn a lesson in respect. The target, Stephen Lyons' uncle, 38-year-old Johnny.
Almost miraculously, Johnny Lyons moved his head at an opportune moment and the shot missed. The second shot was fired into his backside, where he had a wallet with approximately £800 in cash in it, and that took almost the full brunt of the shot. The gunman ran off into the car, and Johnny Lyons lay thinking he'd been murdered, but then realised, I haven't actually been shot here.
A failed assassination attempt, a declaration of war for two rival gangster families.
There's a huge amount of bad blood. For all that this began as a drugs dispute, a territorial dispute, it's become extremely personal.
Good morning, Glasgow. It's the 6th of November and it's time to put those fireworks away. It's going to be a bit
This morning's satellite picture shows plenty of cloud feeding across the region.
A nippy day where the temperature reached 12 degrees and it probably felt a lot colder.
Gangster Jamie Daniel is sending his enforcer, Kevin Gerbil Carroll, on a bizarre mission. His target, the dead child of rival Eddie Lyons.
On his birthday, each year the family would gather at his grave. This particular year, they arrived to find the gravestone had been damaged. There were tire marks around it. The actual stonework had been toppled and broken.
The rumour has it that Carol and his friends were going to take a JCB up there and dig that poor little boy's body up. This is a kid, primary school kid, who had nothing to do with any criminality whatsoever.
For all that there had been tit-for-tat violence ebbing and flowing for many years, this was what really cranked it up and made it hugely personal. This was a declaration of war.
The obvious target of the Lyons' retaliation, Kevin Gerbil Carroll.
Filter. I don't care a fuck. That took a long time. Yeah? Fucking hell, man!
He managed to get out of the vehicle, bleeding heavily, crawled to a nearby door, and the woman who answered the door was a trained nurse who was able to administer immediate aid to him. And I'm told her actions were instrumental in saving his life that night.
Now, it was a quiet suburban street in Glasgow and residents were about to get ready for bed when gunfire destroyed the peace and calm.
As officers continue to scour the area for evidence, both men remain unconscious in a Glasgow hospital. one of them critical, the other stable.
I think possibly Kevin Carroll's own intellect let him down, as did his own ego. I think he got to the point where he thought he was indestructible, and he brought the rivals down on him. I went to doorstepping, and he was a bit growly. It was a two-word response. There was no actual threats, but he was clear he wasn't happy I was there. He said, "I'll be a wee bit hurted, but I'll be all right, but that's not for the paper, big man. See you later." I wouldn't like to be on the wrong side of him.
There are fears tonight that a feud between rival gangs in Glasgow is escalating out of control.
Following the shootings, the family are now very prominent. They're right in the sights of the police. We're paying a lot of attention to them.
The Lyons are hit hard with police drug raids and cash seizures. The Daniel family is also put under police scrutiny.
Jimmy Daniel would have been on the police's radar throughout his life, and he was very surveillance aware. There were examples I know of where he and his business premises were placed under electronic surveillance, and he would spot this and mock it.
The Daniel family, and in particular Jamie Daniel, were spoken about in police circles as someone who was particularly hard to catch. He had the reputation of being one step or two steps ahead of the police all the time and pretty much untouchable.
Evading police attention, the Daniels amass an arsenal of weapons stolen from a British Army barracks. Gerbil is getting ready to go to war.
Kevin Carroll carried out what by then was a kind of well-established routine that he did before carrying out a shooting. He would shave all his body hair off. He would shave his head hair as close as he could get it. And he would then carry out the shooting. This was to avoid leaving his DNA anywhere. And at the conclusion of the shooting, he would douse his whole body in diesel to eliminate any trace of firearms discharge residue.
Tensions are running high in the Glasgow underworld.
What happened next was quite extraordinary. It was one of the most high-profile incidents to take place in this feud.
Lyons family boss Stephen is holding a meeting at his uncle's garage. In just 3 minutes, it's all over, and the gunmen make off.
It was like a scene from a gangster movie, after two masked gunmen shot a man dead and wounded two others.
Stephen Lyons suffers a serious gunshot wound to the leg. His 21-year-old cousin Michael lies dead in a pool of blood.
The intention was to take out the head of the Lyons family during the shooting. There's no doubt in my mind that Stephen Lyons was the intended murder victim. Michael Lyons was unfortunate he's received a fatal shot.
One of the first journalists on the scene is Stephen Wilkie.
You walk up and say, what's happened? Oh, Lyons have all been shot up. What do you mean they've been shot up? Oh, 2 guys have walked in and just opened fire on them. This was kind of a bit spectacular for guys wearing masks to drive into a business and just start shooting up anything that moved.
The murderous attack has brought the gang feud into the public eye.
The Lamb Hill MOT station shooting is hugely significant in this feud because of the level of police investigation.
There's a lot of political pressure over that. Daytime shooting, it's a business. Everyone in the city's talking about it. Every newspaper's printing the names of those who are involved. Yet it was perceived that the police were doing nothing.
Lyons family bosses Eddie Sr. and Stephen have operated for years from their club HQ. The murder of Michael Lyons now forces the police to take action.
Shutdown follows gun down. As police name the dead man killed last night, Glasgow City Council has closed a controversial community centre run by the man's uncle.
Almost immediately, the authorities, after spending years of perversely backing Eddie Lyons' regime at the community centre, had him evicted.
Turfed out from their stronghold, the Lyons family is in complete disarray. Recovering from his bullet wounds, boss Stephen flees to Spain, fearing for his life.
The perception was the Lyons were on the run and had nowhere left to go. An outside observer would have regarded that as game over. The Daniels have won.
Time passes, but gangland grudges never die. The Lyons are regrouping, and their burning hatred for the Daniel family enforcer still rages.
The Lyons group knew if they didn't kill Kevin Carroll, he was going to kill them. And that's what it got to at that point, and it was desperation.
To get at 29-year-old Gerbil, the Lyons are going to exploit their connections.
The Lyons group have become almost obsessive in their attempts to track down Kevin Carroll with the intention of murdering. They had actually infiltrated the police and were getting raw intelligence about the person they were trying to kill.
It charted the movements of Kevin Carroll, his vehicles, his associates, live, crucial intelligence the police had from informants and other sources.
The Lyons inside man soon passes on some information, direct from the Scottish intelligence database.
This stolen intelligence was game-changing.
After nearly a decade of feuding, Jamie Daniels' empire is about to take its biggest hit yet.
This was an opportunity for the Lyons to deal with Kevin Carroll once and for all.
They have terrorised Glasgow for a generation, locked in a bloody war over territory, drugs and money. The Lyons and the Daniels rule by fear, intimidation and violence.
The decade-long war between Glasgow's two rival gangster families has been publicly exposed and is about to reach its bloody climax. Daniel family henchman Kevin Carroll is getting into the back seat of his car, following a meeting with a drug dealer.
Kevin Carroll is totally trapped in the back of this car. He sees them coming. He picks up the manual for the car and holds it over his face. Kevin Carroll is struck at least 5 times. He's hit in the head. He's dead instantaneously.
As armed police and onlookers surround the car in which Kevin Carroll was
Busby said she saw a hooded man holding a Clint Eastwood-style gun. There were lots of people around, and Mrs. Busby then recalled how she could hear a baby crying.
A shopper thought she was caught up in another Dunblane massacre when she heard gunfire in a supermarket car park.
This was a normal working day in a suburban supermarket. There was ordinary families, people going about their daily business. It was a scene of absolute horror and devastation.
A premeditated killing carried out with extreme violence, in effect an execution.
Kevin Carroll was killed by 13 bullets fired from these guns. Spent cartridges littered the car park.
You think you've seen it all in the police, but to see a murder of that nature get carried out in broad daylight in such a public arena, even I was shocked at that.
It sends out a really powerful message to folk. It's the classic, don't F with me, you know. Here's your top man, your big feared enforcer, your main man. Well, look at him now.
The funeral of a Glasgow gangland figure who was shot dead in a supermarket car park has been held 4 months after his death.
As his partner, together with family and friends, paid their respects, Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On was played. Floral tributes in the hearse included one saying, "Gerbil," while a card read, "Daddy, you will always be our hero."
The murder of Kevin Carroll would undoubtedly have harmed Jamie Daniel, both in terms of business, the logistics of losing someone so important and so high profile, and also on a personal level.
Jamie Daniel has not only lost his invaluable lieutenant, he soon realises that open warfare is killing the family business.
There have been calls in Parliament for the Scottish Government to stand up to gangsters after an underworld killing outside a busy Glasgow supermarket.
The time is now right for this Parliament to show leadership by standing up to these unacceptable gangland activities.
Nobody can get business done when that happens. You can't move your half kilo of brown powder across the city to somebody else to chop into tenner bags and punt for you, because there's cops everywhere. Every known associate of yours is going to be stopped with the police. There's going to be police surveillance units everywhere, police helicopter up, plainclothes cops and motorbikes. Everywhere you move, there's going to be cops, and they're going to disrupt your business.
The criminal empire Jamie Daniel has built for the past 25 years is now under serious threat. Just 1 month after Gerbil's murder, the 52-year-old is arrested for road rage.
He'd never appeared on the radar. There was no sign of this guy involved in criminality. So you suddenly have a guy who's at the top of the tree in the criminal world getting done for road rage. But this was a student, I think it was, who was messing around the road. He made a manoeuvre. Jamie Daniel didn't like it. Assaulted the guy. That's not the way someone at the top of the game in the criminal world works. They don't want to be doing that. To stick your head above the parapet like that shows that you're maybe not thinking right. So I think that was a sign that he was losing the grip.
Sentenced to 12 months imprisonment, Jamie Daniels' quarter-of-a-century reign as Scotland's top crime lord crumbles.
It did feed a perception that the police could, in fact, bring these people to account, and even someone like Jamie Daniel, they weren't untouchable. The justice system could get them.
Now banged up, Jamie Daniel is diagnosed with cancer. He dies aged 58. The gangland boss's funeral attracts hundreds of mourners. Even in death, Jamie Daniel remains a mystery.
Jamie Daniels accrued a lot of money, but he was able largely to keep that secret. The police were largely ineffective in really tracking down exactly where his money was coming from.
The death of Jamie Daniel is hard to interpret. It's not like some kind of Mafia movie where he names a successor and there's this clearly defined structure. I think largely organised crime groups are a little bit more chaotic than that.
There was no longer this figurehead who had a pedigree. None of these boys that followed in his shadow have got any of that.
Jamie's death marks the end of an era for the Daniel family. But their war against the Lyons is far from over.